This is Kristen Heemstra, your personal college and career coach. And today we're going to talk about interviewing because a lot of schools, particularly your more selective schools, they're now more selective private schools, are having alumni or other people interview the candidates coming in. Now, these interviews typically do not make or break an application. They're a way for someone who has had the experience at the school to reach out and talk to you and answer questions that you have. And it's also a way for you to find out more information. The person who interviews you often has a rubric, something in which they're going to send the college back information about you. Again, this is typically not what a decision will be based on, but it may be taken into account. Now, the questions are important, but I want to give you a few strategies for actually having the interview be a little bit less stressful than you might think it might be. The first thing is it's a great tip for both an interview and if you ever have to go into a room where you don't know anyone, which as you get older tends to happen a lot more often than when you're younger. And the tip is this: pretend you are the host. So when you go into an interview, make it your calling or your responsibility or your agenda to make the interviewer feel comfortable. That means that you need to be comfortable before you can make somebody else comfortable. But if you have that mindset of my goal is to make the person who's interviewing me feel comfortable, it will kind of change the dynamic of the interview and it will take some of the pressure off. So that is one of the tips. The other one is teenagers in general love you, but sometimes you're not great about talking about yourself. So you do want to get comfortable talking about what you've done. You're educating somebody. You're not trying to impress them. You're not trying to wow them, but you've got to tell them what you've done. If you don't tell them, they're never going to know because an interview isn't given information about you. They don't know. They don't have your application. They don't have your transcript. They don't know your GPA and test scores. They don't have a lot of information when they go into these interviews. So they're going to be asking you questions about that, but be sure to share information with them. Don't hold back because you think it sounds like bragging. If you've done something, tell them. And if it's factual, it's factual. You don't have to worry about it. So first thing is pretend you're the host. Second thing is be sure to share information with them. And the third thing to remember is that you want to ask them questions. So we know from research that job interviews where somebody gets hired typically is a 50-50 give. So 50% of the time the interviewer is talking and 50% of the time the interviewee is talking, which means that there's a lot of questions coming out in these conversations. So when you are interviewing for a school, be sure to ask questions that you can't find the answers to on the internet, but questions about the person's experience with their educational institution. Now, most of the time, the person who's interviewing you will have attended that school. Sometimes, on rare occasion, you'll get an interview where the person who's interviewing you hasn't been to the school they're interviewing for. In that case, you can ask them, what advice would you have for freshmen? There's all kinds of questions that you can ask. How is it best to get involved? Things like that will get them speaking, which is what you want them to do. In the meantime, I pulled up, as you can see here, Prep Scholar is a good blog. They have questions, the most common questions. We're going to do a little bit of information on these. Tell me about yourself. So when you get this question, you want to give just a general answer. You don't have to talk about all your personal stuff. This is typically related to school. So what you want to study, what your extracurriculars are, you can certainly mention your family, but you want to have it more geared toward your education than you do the personal side. So that is an important thing to keep in mind. And you don't want to go on and on. You also don't want to be touching your hair. You don't want to be, obviously picking your nose, sitting on your hands, doing a lot of this. You want to be as professional as possible when you are interviewing with these. Ahs, all that kind of thing. Watch out for it. If you have the opportunity, tape yourself. Talk about yourself to yourself. Talk about yourself with somebody else. When you do these things, you just get better at it. That's all it is. It's like learning to walk, right? You have to try a bunch of times. You get really good at it because you try it all the time. The same is true with any type of interviewing, but this in particular. The next thing they're going to want to know typically is why you're interested in that school. So have done your research, have been on their website if you haven't visited. Also know about your major and why your major is important to that school. What I have seen recently is that schools are not just matching students with an interviewer or interviewee, but they're also looking to find people who have similar interests. So my students who are interested in neuroscience are finding they're being interviewed by people who have a background in neuroscience, engineering, that kind of a thing. So it's been super interesting. So be aware of why you think the college would be a good fit for you, and also keep in mind the major. That's questions 2 and 3. So those are things to keep in mind. They're going to ask you about academic strengths and weaknesses in a job interview. It's what are your strengths and weaknesses. What you want to do is come up with things that are instantly relatable. So your academic strengths may be very obvious from what you want to study, right? You may be super good at math. You may be super good at science, whatever. Be happy to share that with them. Say, hey, I really enjoy math. It's something I'm good at. I took AP BC Calculus my sophomore year, and I've since gone on to take school, I'm making this up, colleges, math classes or something like that. If that's a fact, say the facts, right? If you don't like math, you don't have to say that. You don't have to say anything about it. Maybe you like social studies. Maybe you love to write, whatever. But if you have any evidence, say it. So you could say, I enjoy writing. I've done really well in my writing classes. I've written papers on these topics. I've also been a part of the school newspaper. So that could be one of your academic strengths. And then your academic weaknesses. What you want to do when you do weaknesses of any kind is you want to talk about where your areas of growth are and how you are growing. So you may want to talk about, well, I'm working on getting better at planning out my work. While I've always done really well in school, my organizational skills have had an opportunity to really develop this year, and I've gotten much better at planning things. So that has been a challenge for me, but it's something I'm really working on. You can make up anything. You just have to talk about how you're working on changing whatever that thing is. You can say, school used to come really easy to me. This year I'm finding that I have to put a lot more time into it, and there was a little hiccup there, but I'm really starting to get my groove, and I'm finding that, X amount of hours I can study and I can knock everything out. Whatever you want to say is fine, but just make sure that when you talk about your area of growth or your weakness, as it's called, that you also talk about how you have worked to improve it. So that's a big one. How do you plan to contribute to this school? So that is an easy answer because you can base it off of how you've contributed to your high school. So if you play on a sports team, if you've been involved in the Red Cross Club or wherever you have been involved, be sure to mention that and say, I've done this in my high school. I want to do some variation of it in college. And you can even say, and I've looked at the website, and I see that they have great clubs that do this. I'm really looking forward to joining X, Y, and Z club. It lets them know that you have done some information, done some reconnaissance on the school. You know what the school's about. But then it's a great time to say, what were you involved in at the school? What did you like most about it? What would be your advice for somebody coming in? Because again, you want to pull them out. That's a super important part of this interview process, is trying to pull your interviewer out and to talk about the school and to share their experiences. I haven't had a lot of students get this question, what do you expect to be doing 10 years from now? That is a question often I have students think about when they're writing their essay. You can say wherever you plan to be, whatever you plan to be doing. The way that the interviews are set up for a lot of schools is that the interviewer is given carte blanche. They can actually ask you almost anything. So it's not a job interview. You don't have all the red tape around that. They should be school-related questions, obviously, but they don't have to ask you anything. So you can also expect to have a wide range of questions. What would you change about your high school? This question we've also seen a lot in the form right now of essay questions. It's become super popular. And this would be a great time for you to talk about different policies or different ways people treat each other or different things you would like to see incorporated into your school that aren't. So have a response to it. I don't know if you'll get that question, but it is something you want to think about. Most of my clients haven't gotten the admiration question, but it's a great one. I've seen it on a lot of brag sheets or, a lot of information gathering sheets. Who do you admire? Why do you admire them? I do see this book question. Some of the, again, you'll see some of these on the actual applications for schools. Have a favorite book, know how to talk about it. Assume your person hasn't read it, so give a short synopsis. If they have, you don't have to. You can go in and talk about it in more depth. Why do you want to go to college? Most people are going to say to get a good job. Have a little bit more depth in that. Most people aren't asking that question because the assumption is you've already figured that out and that's why you've applied. But if you haven't gotten clear on why you want to go to college, make sure you do that. Not just for the interviewer's sake, but for your own sake. Fun question. What do you do for fun? Again, haven't had clients ask that, but if it comes up, you'll know the answer. Obstacles. This one comes up. It's interesting. This comes up a lot in actual interview questions, application questions, and it may come up in interview questions. Have some obstacles to talk about. You do not have to mention the most major thing that's happened in your life if you don't want to. Have maybe 5 or 6 obstacles. Just list them out there and say, I had, this was an obstacle, this was an obstacle, big or small, but have some examples because you may get this question in a bunch of different ways in your application and you may get it in an interview. What makes you unique? Now, hopefully in this process, you've started thinking about your narrative. So what makes you unique? It could be the fact that you play bluegrass. It could be that you do Indian dance. There are tons of different ways. Maybe you're an artist. But be able to articulate not only what makes you unique, but the evidence you have behind what makes you unique. So let's say you're an artist. You can say, I'm an artist. I really enjoy doing watercolor painting. I just put some of my watercolors up at the local coffee shop. I've also done photography and, whatever, but make sure you can give examples of how you are taking whatever makes you unique and pushing it out into the community in some way. So some things to do. You want to look nice. You don't want to go completely casual. You don't need to go over the top suit and tie. You want to be as relaxed as possible. So again, if you imagine yourself as being the one that's hosting, it can kind of loosen things up a bit. And you don't have to overly prepare for this because typically it's conversational. They're just looking to get a general impression. And also keep in mind, this type of interview will not make or break you. Now, I have had clients also get second interviews after this interview. And sometimes those are done by people in the actual admissions office. They're coming through with a different set of questions. And the ones that I've seen most recently are around how do you think? What makes your thinking unique? So if you have someone reaches out for you for an interview from the actual admissions department and you've already done your alumni interview, start to think about that. Like, what makes your thinking unique? Why would you be a good addition to the class? What unique perspective do you bring? So hopefully those were super helpful tips, and let's move on to the next video.